So this is the third week of our series, Christmas Stories. We're celebrating the stories of Christmas, specifically the stories surrounding the coming of Jesus from God's Word. In week one, we looked at the story of Joseph, a normal guy who became the adoptive father of Jesus, and the significance he found in being obedient to the voice of God. And then last week we looked at the nameless guys known as simply the shepherds, who were minding their own business, tending their flocks at night in the dark, when God sent angels to bring this huge announcement of the coming of the Messiah. And we really looked at the fact that God sending the message to them assured the world that Jesus had come for people like them. He'd come for the lowest of the low. He'd come for the people who thought themselves insignificant, the people least deserving, people like you and me. He came for all people. And so we looked at that last week. And it's just fun to get to look at these Christmas stories. I mean, Christmas is, I think many people would say it's their favorite time of the year. Anybody that would agree with that? It's kind of I raise my hand. It's kind of my favorite. It's called the most wonderful time of the year. There was a song written. You can't dispute it. It's the most wonderful time of the year. We do know, though, that even though it is the most wonderful time of the year, for some of you, it's a difficult time. Maybe you don't have great memories of Christmas growing up. Maybe some of you, you'll be going through a first Christmas without a loved one, and we know that's going to be difficult. And so even as we look at this, we see the joy mixed with the sorrow and how God uses that in our lives. And boy, have the lines not been blurred between even Thanksgiving and Christmas. It all kind of runs together. And so I mentioned last week, you could be a Grinch about that and be like, no, don't even mention Christmas till we've gotten past. But I would just say this, just own it, just embrace it and say this. This is an entire season, over a month, where I would think most people agree that we focus on what matters most to us, the people that matter the most. What deserves our time and our energy, our love, our gifts, our giving, what deserves our thanks. That's all woven into this whole season that lasts over a month. And so today, as we open God's Word, let me encourage you to ask this question: what is deserving of our worship? So let's go to Matthew chapter 2, and we're going to read the first 12 verses. Matthew chapter 2, the first 12 verses. If you don't have a Bible, all the verses are going to be on the screen. And if you're using an app on your phone or other device, I use the Christian Standard Bible if you want to kind of sync up with me. It says this, starting in verse 1. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of King Herod, wise men from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star at its rising and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was deeply disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. So he assembled all the chief priests and scribes of the people and asked them where the Christ would be born. "In Bethlehem of Judea," they told him, "because this is what was written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, because out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly summoned the wise men and asked them the exact time the star appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. When you find him, report back to me so that I too can go and worship him." After hearing the king, they went on their way, and there it was, the star they had seen at its rising. It led them until it came and stopped above the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overwhelmed with joy. Entering the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and falling to their knees, they worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their own country by another route. So the Bible just tells us a little bit of information. If you haven't noticed this, you'll kind of pick up on the trend hopefully today. But the stories we're looking at, we don't actually have a ton of information. We don't have a lot of information about who Joseph was. We really don't have any information about who he was before he enters that story and becomes the husband of Mary. Last week we looked at the shepherds. We don't know who these guys were. We don't know how many of them there were. We don't know their names. We don't know any of those things. And God used these people. There's mystery woven into this. So it just simply tells us that during the days of Herod as king, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem looking for Jesus. Now we know that they may have traveled a significant distance. Consider this, that they're called, number one, that they're called wise men. The actual word there is the word magi. You guys ever heard the word magi? It's a word you only use at Christmas time, right? And so they're called magi. The word magus is actually Persian in its origin. And we know they're from the east because that's spelled out there in Scripture. So some scholars believe that they may have been descended from the wise men or the magicians of ancient Babylon. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Another thing to consider is this. When they don't return to Herod after seeing the child and then being told in a dream not to go back, Herod does the math because he was kind of freaking out about there being a new king coming onto the scene, and it wasn't going to be him or one of his sons. So he does the math and says, okay, based on when the star rose, let's just issue a decree to kill every baby boy 2 years old and under. That ought to make sure that we can wipe out whoever this potential new king would be. So just so you know, that means, and it's in Scripture, the wise men did not show up on the night of the birth. It clearly, it says after Jesus was born. Also, he asked the timing of when the star rose. So technically, they shouldn't even be in the nativity set, okay? We talked about how Joseph's times, you can't tell which one he is. I'm not sure they should even be in there, okay? But that's, that we can discuss that another time. So just who were these guys? Well, we really don't know. But again, as I said, a lot of scholars think they may have been descendants of the Babylonian wise men. How many of you have ever heard of Balaam from the Old Testament? So what is Balaam famous for? Anybody? Talking donkey. Yeah, you've heard that story of a donkey that speaks in the Old Testament. Well, he spoke to Balaam. So Balaam was kind of an early traveling soothsayer prophet for hire is kind of what he was. He was from a place called Pethor, which is right near Babylon. Okay? First century Jewish historian Philo referred to Balaam as a magus, same word. Referred to him as a magi, as a wise man. That's who he was. So he may have been kind of a predecessor or ancestor to the wise men that we see in Babylon. So Balaam's hired by Balak to come and to curse the Israelites who, as they're traveling through to the promised land, he wants to curse them. So Balaam takes the job. He's going to come in, he's going to prophesy doom over them, and God won't let it happen. And actually ends up having his donkey talk to him to get him to stop. But in the process of that, I believe Balaam unintentionally prophesies about the Messiah. You can see it in Numbers 24:17. Don't turn there, it's going to be on the screen. But he makes this prophecy. He says, I see him, but not now. I perceive him, but not near. A star will come from Jacob, and a scepter will arise from Israel. He will smash the forehead of Moab and strike down all the Shethites. A star. We just heard about a star, right? We saw it right there in Matthew. The wise men show up, and what do they say? Where is the King of the Jews? Because we saw his star when it rose. They knew about the prophecy that Balaam gave in Numbers 24. They were nearby neighbors and probably were connected. They ran in the same circles. If you read the book of Daniel, you'll see Daniel was among the wise men when Daniel and his buddies were taken captive out of Israel and taken to Babylon. It says that they were identified and then groomed and trained to become a part of the Magi, same word, the wise men of Babylon. Those same Babylonian wise men are the ones that when King Nebuchadnezzar has a dream and it kind of freaks him out, he calls his wise men in and he says, hey, tell me what I dreamt and then interpret it for me. And they're all like, okay, we've been interpreting dreams, but he's never asked us to tell him the dream first. We can't, so they're like, give us some time. And so they try to stall, and finally he calls me, he goes, you're just stalling. Either tell me or not. And they're like, no one can do this. So King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon issues a decree to kill all the wise men. So they go searching for Daniel and the guys who Babylonian names are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You've heard of them, the ones who walked through the fire. They go searching for them to kill them too because they were part of the wise men. Daniel hears about it. He grabs his buddies and says, we've got to pray. And they pray, dear God, show us the dream. And God does. And so Daniel goes back and he says, can you tell me the dream? And Daniel says, no man can. But then there's a verse I love in Daniel where he says, but there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. And honestly, I mean, there's so much mystery woven into even like the stories we're looking at. Men like Joseph, the shepherds, the wise men. But God reveals. And even the story of the coming of Christ was God beginning to unravel and to reveal a mystery of how he would redeem. He says, no man can, but God can. And basically, God's the one who gave me this. So Daniel tells him the dream. He interprets the dream. And then Daniel ends up rising in power over all of Babylon. He would have been the leader of those Babylonian wise men. Now you're thinking right now, Carrie, what does that have to do with this story? I think these guys were connected. I think that they were descendants who came after those Babylonian wise men who were under the leadership of Daniel. And here's why. Because when they saw this star, they knew what it meant. And they knew what it meant because Daniel, in his writings, prophesied about the timing of the coming of the Messiah. He told them. It was spelled out weeks, numbers of weeks, and they could calculate. They could do the math. So when the star rose, they go, this is the star. This is the star that Balaam talked about in Numbers, the star that would rise out of Jacob. So they go. Unfortunately, when they get there, they had Daniel's prophecy, but they didn't have the other prophecies. The prophecies that when they arrive in Jerusalem, they say, hey, where is he? They didn't have Micah's prophecies, or they would have gone straight to Bethlehem. So they say, where is it? And they pull up the other prophecies, and they tell them, well, it's going to be born in Bethlehem. But when they saw the star rise, they knew what it meant, and they would travel any distance. They arrive in Jerusalem, and they ask, where can we find him? And Herod, grasping for power, wants to find out exactly when the star rose, sends them to Bethlehem and asks them to confirm so he can go worship too. But he's just a big liar. He had no intention of worshiping. He only had murderous thoughts towards him. So that's kind of how I think these wise men were. Why they knew, why they recognized the star. They came. And so what can we learn from them? I think the first thing we learn is why they came. Their purpose for arriving was that they came to worship. In verse 2, they say, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star at its rising and have come to worship him. They'd come to worship him. These wise men, these magi from the east, had come to worship. So if they were from Babylon, they had traveled maybe 900 miles, give or take. Just for a frame of reference, that's roughly the distance from Farmington to Orlando, Florida. So for those of you who've taken your kids to Disney, just imagine you and your 5 kids loading up on camels for the journey to Orlando. They traveled a distance to get there. And it wasn't a sightseeing trip. It wasn't a vacation with a little mouse and big ears. It wasn't about astrology or astronomy. It wasn't just about this star. Was it really a star? That's a question you could ask. It didn't act like a star. It rose in the wrong spot. It seemed to move. This was a divine light that was leading them. You can see that elsewhere in the Old Testament, can't you? Think about the children of Israel as they followed God through the wilderness. A pillar of fire. And so it leads them to Jerusalem, but it doesn't lead them to Bethlehem. But when they head out, there you go, it appears again. There it was. And it leads, and then it kind of stops and rests over the exact place. And it wasn't just about them wanting to track a star. It was about worshiping the Messiah that had come to set all people free. See, the story of the wise men reminds us why Jesus came. Not just so we'd have a neat story of a baby in a manger, in a stable. It reminds us why we celebrate Christmas at all. Because it was the moment that marked a turning point in all of eternity. When God birthed hope and deliverance right in our midst. And God was with us. And the wise men had been looking for it. They were expecting it. And when the star arose, they responded. They came to worship. That's the purpose of Christmas. Every Christmas story is a story of worship. The second thing I think we can learn from them and we would note is there in verse 10. Look at verse 10 again. It says, when they saw the star, They were overwhelmed with joy. Overwhelmed with joy. I don't often read the New International Version. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just not one I read a lot. But I love the way the NIV words this. It uses the word, it says that they were overjoyed. You ever been overjoyed? See, it's really it's almost like four Greek words that they're trying to translate with one. That's why it's overwhelming joy. It's like a joy that compounds on itself. Like interest that compounds daily, it grows more and more based on the amount you had before. Like if there was a percentage you could apply to the joy, it grows by that, and then the next amount that is applied. It's a compounding joy. It's joy upon joy upon joy upon joy. They were overjoyed. That means every moment that passed, every new experience in this journey, this search for this King of the Jews that was marked by the rising of this star, their joy increased. It was a growing joy. They were overjoyed. I mean, joy, that's a Christmas word, right? That's a Christmas thought. You think about the joy we see like in children's faces when they open presents. These wise men and the whole nation of Israel had been waiting for a Messiah who would come and save them, and now he's here. And they're overjoyed. The thing I think is strange is that some Christians seem to be underjoyed. You know, it's like if you can tell if someone is underfed, right? Or if they've underslept, you know, by their mood and their attitude, right? Some believers, they don't seem to be overjoyed like a compounding. It's almost like their joy decreases by the moment. I mean, the last thing I want to be is as I grow older that my joy decreases. I want to be an overjoyed person. It sometimes baffles me when I see it in myself and when I see it in others that I could be this forgiven and that unhappy. They were overjoyed. And at Christmas, you have all the reason in the world to be obviously and obnoxiously overjoyed. Just go ahead and be that person. Be the most joyful person that anybody knows. They were overjoyed. I think we can learn that from them. And then I've got one more lesson for you. They came to worship and they were overjoyed in that, and then that was expressed through giving. Verse 11 says, entering the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and falling to their knees, they worshiped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Now, I know what some of you are thinking right now. You're going, oh no. This is a giving message. He tricked us. He said this was a Christmas series, and we're going to talk about the wise men. And he's just like every other Baptist preacher. It's a giving message. And I don't like giving messages, especially at Christmas, because I've got extra bills and I got gifts to buy. Don't talk to me about giving right now. Okay? So my first response to that would be simply this. People who are givers love giving messages. You can apply that however you need to. You know what else? Generous people love it when people talk about being generous. Remember, these wise men were overjoyed, and it overflowed in giving. They opened their treasures. They recognized the star because they knew the prophecies. They had been waiting, and when they saw it, and the more of it that was revealed to them, the more their joy grew. When they arrive in Jerusalem, just imagine they arrive in Jerusalem, they go, where is he? They think he's going to be right there, and they go, actually, hold on, we've got to check our records. They pull out the prophecies, and they go, well, according to the prophecies, he's in Bethlehem. They're like, oh, so we are on the right track. This isn't a fool's errand. This isn't a wild goose chase. So then they head out again, and as soon as they head out, there's the star again, and they're overjoyed. This is real. This is actually going to happen. We're going to find him. For generations, they've been talking about these prophecies, and we're going to be the ones who see it and experience it. And they get there, and they walk in, and their response isn't high fives, it's not hallelujahs. They collapse to their knees. They went from being overwhelmed. They came to worship. It's why they came. But I think even the amount of the worship and the joy, it kind of snuck up on them. Because when they saw the child there with Mary, his mother, they just hit their knees. And their first instinct was, where are the gifts? And so they open their treasures and they give gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Now, it's been a while since I've bought any myrrh or frankincense. Just to be honest with you, I don't know the going rate. Can anybody help me out with that? I mean, how much is an ounce of frankincense going to set me back? How about gold? Anybody know the going rate for an ounce of gold? I'm thinking it's more than myrrh or frankincense. Like, we always assume, right, that there were 3 wise men. They each had a gift. They came in, they drew straws. The first guy drew his out. He got the short straw. He's like, gold. The other guy was like, frankincense. I got a pile of that at the house already. We know that there's significance and symbolism in the gifts, right? You probably heard messages on that. If you have, forget them. I might preach that next year. Gold is because he was a king, right? Frankincense because of his priestly role, that he would be the go-between between God and man. And then myrrh, well, that's used in burial and embalming, the symbol that he was going to die. They came and they gave from joy. There was no griping. There was no complaining. I mean, honestly, we don't know if there were 3. There could have been 30. And they could have each brought gold and frankincense and myrrh. Because there was worship that was motivating the giving. And love was motivating the worship. And honestly, all of worship is a response. Something happens or somebody is there and we respond in worship. They hit their knees and worshiped. And they expressed that worship by giving. The truth is that we give and we worship in response to the way God has given to us. John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him will not perish but have everlasting life. He gave Jesus. We give in response to that. We worship in response to that. Romans 5:8. God demonstrated his love. He loved us first, in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. He gave his life for us. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. When they saw the child, they were overwhelmed and they fell and bowed to their knees in worship. And all they could do was open up their treasures and give whatever they had. Give all that they had. You see, they were overjoyed because of what they had experienced. Let me ask you this. What is it in your life that has you overjoyed? They've been waiting on a prophecy, on a promise, and it came. They followed, and each step of the way they saw God provide and continue to lead them, and their joy compounded and it grew. What is it? What is it that God has done in your life that has you overjoyed? What is the answered prayer? So, well, it's been a while since he answered one of my prayers. To that I would respond this way. Are you still asking and believing? And I'm going to be honest with you. I'm still praising God for all of the answered prayers. Some big, some small. Some that now that I look back were bigger than I ever realized. Things like when I decided where God wanted me to go to college. I didn't have a college fund. My dad is a retired Baptist pastor. He always pastored churches of about 100 people. Some of you maybe grew up in churches like that or recently attended churches like that. Here's what you can probably know. Those pastors don't make a lot of money, and my dad had 6 kids, okay? Do that math. There's no college funds. I prayed. I didn't know any better. I just prayed and said, God, if you want me to go there, you're going to have to pay the way. And then he did it. A week before I start my first week of classes, I get another little grant. It was tiny. And then I didn't pay a dime for 4 years at a private college. Didn't even buy my books. God paid for that. And that opened the door. I met my wife there. Thank you, God. I'm still overjoyed because of the way he's done. What's he done that's got you overjoyed? You see, it's only the things of this world that take joy away, that leave us underjoyed. So we go back, and I'm telling you this, if you're overjoyed, you're going to worship And you're going to express that through giving. So the wise men brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Those seemed appropriate gifts. So what can we give? What can you give? What could we possibly bring? Does he need our gold? Some of you think, I don't have any gold. Okay, well, does cash work? Does he need my cash? Is that what this message is about, Carrie? You're going to pass the plate in a minute, and you're hoping that some of us will go from $5 bills to $20 bills this week? Some of us will go from 20s to hundreds? Like, no. Like, God doesn't need any of that. We give that. We give that in response. It's an act of worship. But let me throw one other idea at you. Romans 12:1. Therefore, brothers and sisters, in view of the mercies of God, or in response to the mercies of God, I urge you to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true worship. Their worship was expressed through giving. Paul's writing here to the Romans. Therefore, brothers and sisters, in response to the way God has shown his mercy to you, present your bodies. Does that mean literally we lay down our bodies as sacrifices? This is living sacrifices. The idea here of your body isn't just your physical body. It's all of you, which includes your body. But when it's all of you, that means it is your body, it is your heart, soul, mind, strength. It is your bank account. It's all of it. You present all of what you have. To be honest with you, that's a much greater sacrifice than to just bring gold, frankincense, and myrrh. If all you ever give God is what you put in the plate, you've missed the biggest gift that happened at Christmas. The truth is that in response to God's ultimate gift of sending Jesus, the best that we can give is to give ourselves, all of who we are. So it doesn't matter what else you give this Christmas season. It doesn't matter how generous or over the top your gifts are. It doesn't matter if you blow them away with your creativity or how well you paid attention to their needs and their wants and their dreams. Unless you've responded to the coming of Christ by bowing in worship and expressing it by giving all of who you are completely to him, you have missed the significance of Christmas. The truth is that every Christmas story and every Christmas sermon is a giving sermon. It's about what God gave us. And everything we do is in response to that. The way we live, the way we love, the way we sacrifice, yes, the way we give financially for the sake of the gospel and those who've never heard. Have you given yourself completely to him in response to the fact that he held nothing back from you?